Hi, I'm Sarah Robinson from Nautilus International. On the 1st of October this year, we held a session of our Professional and Technical Forum. It's a member meeting, which is normally private, but the members appreciated one presentation so much that they asked for us to record it and broadcast it. And that was a presentation by our Head of Professional and Technical, David Appleton. He's going to talk about autonomous ships in the presentation that you're about to see, which are also called MASS or Marine Autonomous Surface Ships. Please note that in the presentation, there was one bit which didn't work very well, which was a video where the sound didn't play. So what we've done is we just cut that a bit short. So when it goes quiet, just hang on for a few seconds and the commentary will come back in. Hope you enjoy it.
Right, so that's our agenda for today. We've done members' issues, so we're going to do an update on the current situation with autonomous ships. So I'm sure people that have attended these meetings before and anyone that reads anything in the maritime press will be familiar with these sorts of photos, which were all the rage a few years ago when the likes of Rolls-Royce, Kongsberg, etc. were really ramping it up with their marketing and doing their best to tell us that we would all be out of a job in the next few years, and we would have large autonomous container ships floating around the world. So this is kind of a background on how we got to where we are and how the mass situation has developed compared to how it was predicted a few years ago. So I'm just going to start with this video here, which is the Rolls-Royce very sleek video they put out in 2016. This was. Yeah, that was a PR video put out by Rolls-Royce, Kongsberg, etc. In 2016, which gave us a very sort of sleek, futuristic view of how the autonomous ship scene was going to look according to their predictions. And that was a result of a project called Moonin, which started in 2013, which basically developed the concept of autonomous shipping and remote control shipping and set out sort of a prototype model for how they envisaged that working. And obviously it was very successful. There was a lot of media coverage. It seemed every conference at the time was covering the subject of autonomous ships, and there was all sorts of grand predictions being made as to exactly how quickly this would be developed. So according to Rolls-Royce and the consortium that were involved in the Moonin project, this was their envisaged timeline at the time. So they were predicting that in 2020 we'd have commercial use of autonomous vessels in local waters, that by 2020 the Yara Birkeland, who I'm sure we're all familiar with, would be operating fully autonomously. We'd have short runs of autonomous ships in local waters by 2020, and they were predicting that vessels like tugs and ferries would be operating in this mode by then. And midterm predictions were that we'd have ocean-going autonomous vessels by 2025, and autonomous deep-sea cargo vessels would be common sight by 2030. So how's it going? Here we are in 2024, and I think it's fair to say a lot of those predictions haven't turned out to be true. The Yara Birkeland is operating, but it's not operating autonomously. It still has a crew of 3 on board at present. I think there are plans to reduce that to 2 shortly, but the current trial is set to be completed in 2026. The company involved are claiming it's regulatory issues that are preventing the vessel from operating in fully autonomous mode rather than technological, but there is obviously somewhat of a chicken and egg scenario there in the fact that you can't expect the regulator to approve a mode of operation until you've proven it's safe. Many will claim that the prediction of commercially operated autonomous vessels by 2025 has come to fruition, but what they tend to be talking about when they make these claims are vessels such as this, which is the Fugro Vanquita, which is a 12-meter long USV, and it's just secured Category 0 approval by the UK MCA. and has recently been deployed on a wind farm in Scotland to take fully autonomous survey work. So it is a commercially operating autonomous vessel, but it's not quite on the scale that was envisaged back in 2016 when that video was put out. So in terms of the future, it's not to say that there haven't been significant developments and that we won't see the operations as envisaged. It's just it's taken slightly longer than was originally forecast. So as an example here, this is an actual vessel. This is one of Ocean Infinity's 78-meter Armada vessels. This is there's 23 vessels planned overall, and the first 8 have now been delivered. These are ammonia-ready vessels, and they are designed to operate with only a skeleton crew on board, with the majority of operations being taken remotely from their operations centres. And we have actually visited one in Southampton a couple of years back, and it is very much of, it does remind you of those early Rolls-Royce videos in the way it's all set out. And that they plan to employ trained seafarers to operate remotely. They have all the equipment there ready. They have DMV approval for these vessels. They're just awaiting regulatory approval from administrations, and they're pretty much ready to go. They're talking about operating with a crew of around 12, as opposed to what would normally be a 40 to 50 person operation on these vessels. And there's a huge number of other projects underway with various timescales. We've got in Norway, they've recently ordered 4 battery-powered ferry vessels, which they plan to operate autonomously by 2028. There's tests ongoing in Amsterdam and in Busan regarding autonomous water taxis. There's a project in Germany looking at autonomous passenger ferries, and there's many, many more, far too many for us to go into in detail today. But one of the main reasons we see was put forward for the delay in adoption of these vessels is actually the regulatory regime, and the fact that the regulations haven't quite kept up with what technology is capable of, or at least what the manufacturers claim the technology is capable of. So in terms of regulation, this is where Nautilus have put in a huge amount of work over the last few years, starting from the very beginning at the IMO in 2017. Following a proposal from the UK and other interested flag states, the IMO undertook what they called a regulatory scoping exercise, which was where they actually reviewed every single piece of IMO legislation and assessed it to determine whether or not that specific requirement allowed for the operation of autonomous vessels, whether it prohibited the operation of autonomous vessels, or whether it needed modifying to allow for the operation of autonomous vessels. That completed in 2019. 2020. And the main outcome of that was that nobody had quite agreed what they were talking about, and everybody had very different assumptions they were operating under, which meant that it was very difficult to make direct comparisons of the work that various flag states had undertaken. However, despite that, it was decided to go ahead with the work to develop a non-mandatory code to allow for the operation of mass vessels. That started in 2022, and Nautilus have taken a very active part in that through our affiliations with the ITF, that's the International Transport Workers Federation, and IFSMA, which is the International Federation of Shipmasters Associations. And we have attended countless hours of meetings at the IMO, both at the Maritime Safety Committee. There is a joint working group on that, which is the Maritime Safety Committee, the FOW Committee, and the Legal Committee, all looking at cross-cutting issues. There's been intersessional working groups. We have correspondence groups, and altogether, it's been a huge amount of work that's been put into developing this code so far. But it's not been without its problems, mainly caused again by the fact there's very different interpretations and very different visions of what mass is going to look like. And what we're effectively trying to do is to design regulations for something that's not yet in operation, as opposed to what we normally do, which is regulate technology that already exists. So there's been a number of sticking points there. There's been a number of areas where we were significantly concerned with how the development was going, most particularly with discussions around the shipmaster, where there were proposals. I mean, it's been agreed that a master doesn't necessarily need to be on board the vessel, which would be a given if you're talking about unmanned vessels, but then There have been suggestions that a master may be able to be in charge of more than one ship at one time. There's been suggestions that a master may not need to be on board, even if there are people on board, which was very much a red line for us. It does seem that now we're approaching a deadline of 2025 to complete the non-mandatory code, that some realism has struck home, and we're now maybe less concerned about those issues than we were. And it does seem that people seem to be agreeing to some more practical, pragmatic solutions rather than pushing for it to be left completely open to allow any possible mode of operation. However, we still are of the opinion that what's being developed IMO is far from perfect. It's far too broad, it's far too vague, and it potentially allows conventional vessels to undermine the current regulations, as it's not entirely clear under the current definition what is a mass and what isn't a mass. But that is due for completion by next year. The scope of it is actually at the moment is SOLAS vessels, which is over 500 tons and on international voyages, which means initially it's going to apply to very few vessels indeed, because there are very few mass vessels that meet that definition at present. But the original plan was to make this code mandatory by 2028, I think, recognizing the difficulties that have been involved in developing a non-mandatory part, and that has now slipped. And it's I think there's a recognition that there's going to need to be what they call an experience building phase before we move into the mandatory part. But just an interesting point on the difference between non-mandatory and mandatory there. There's a sort of a feeling that it's okay if this code isn't perfect because it's non-mandatory. However, it is a code that allows you to have exemptions from mandatory instruments. So from our point of view, it has to be right first time, and we're not entirely sure that it is going to be, but we are where we are. Obviously, bearing in mind the slow progress at IMO and how the scope of the code at IMO isn't necessarily going to apply to the vessels that are actually in existence now and actually being operated. There's been significant work nationally to advance the regulatory regime, both in the UK and the Netherlands and other countries in Northern Europe. So in UK, the MARLab was established in 2018, which was aimed at addressing the gaps that exist in legislation for mass. There was quite an extensive consultation exercise in last year. Completed was the Future of Transport Regulatory Review, which made a number of recommendations as to changes that need to be made to national legislation, and it effectively proposed the development of a comprehensive national framework to allow for the operation of mass in national waters. In the meantime, while obviously we've had a change of government, and that consultation started under the Boris Johnson Conservative government, so how much has been lost in the various changes over the last couple of years, I'm not sure. But in the meantime, there is still work going on. The UK is currently issuing exemptions to operators on a case-by-case basis. Essentially, they have to make a safety case, make a proposal for how they intend to operate, and the MCA assesses that on a case-by-case basis and either says yes or no, or suggests conditions under which they would be able to say yes. The workboat code has been updated and now contains provisions to cover remote controlled vessels under 24 meters. So effectively, if you have something classed under the workboat code that you can operate remotely, it needs to meet all of the existing requirements of the workboat code, but there's an annex for remote control vessels with additional requirements that it needs to meet. And another project that Nautilus have been heavily involved in is the developing of a competency framework for remote operators. We can't give too many details exactly on what's being developed there because it is private until it's published, but essentially we are developing a UK scheme to allow for the qualifications for remote operators which are above and beyond the minimum level of SDCW qualification. And we've also been in touch with the MCA recently just to basically express our concerns with how the development of the code is going at the IMO, and how our perception is that certain stakeholders carry more weight in their opinions than others. And subsequent to that, we had a meeting with the chief executive of the MCA, and we we are now fully up to speed with MCA policy, and we are attending the first meeting next week of the inaugural mass stakeholders group. So that's a positive development, and that will help us to get our points across and ensure that the seafarers' opinion is taken into account when developing the UK framework. Similar work has been going on in the Netherlands. In 2017, a joint industry project on autonomous shipping was initiated, which involved 17 partners in the Netherlands, scoped investigating autonomous technologies and also regulatory and other barriers to adoption. The Netherlands Maritime Technology Foundation has been coordinating efforts to develop safety plans and criteria for sea trials, which have been adopted and approved. And the Dutch government has been participating very extensively in the work at IMO as well to influence the direction of travel there. And some specific projects that have happened in the Netherlands have been sea trials of various autonomous navigation systems. CZIP is a prominent one, and some trials of some systems that can be retrofitted to existing vessels. And there's also been extensive research, obviously, in the Netherlands at Marin and other educational institutions. And just a point I wanted to touch on here is the cooperation that's going on between Northern European countries, especially this North Sea Alliance we have here. They announced last month, I believe it was, an MOU on cooperation on matters related to mass. So obviously that's Norway, the Netherlands, UK, Belgium, and Denmark. There's a conference happening next week, actually, where we're going to hear all about this project. But essentially, this is the purpose of the agreement here, is to simplify the operation of autonomous ships in the North Sea, ensuring that the regulatory frameworks will align with each other. Essentially collaboration, information sharing, and ensuring that the countries are working together rather than against each other, and that we don't create barriers there to mass operating between those countries. So summary, really, I think if we look back at 2016, some of the claims that have been made, they were very bold, they were very grand. They haven't quite come to fruition, but I think we have to bear in mind the purpose of those claims was to, I think, sort of shift the window to adjust people's perceptions and to actually get people to open up and be open to these ideas. And that's actually been very successful. Obviously, we have, the IMO are developing a code, national administrations are developing their own measures, and I think for most people involved, it doesn't seem quite as preposterous idea as it might have done 8 or so years ago. There's also been a lot of technological development in that time, and maybe some of the objections that we would have had 8 years ago about the feasibility of mass, especially in relation to connectivity, for example. We're in a different world there now with Starlink and OneWeb and the like. But again, the development does continue to be very gradual, and from our point of view, we don't foresee any time in the near future that these vessels and these modes of operation are on a large scale replacing seafarers. If you look at what's actually commercially viable, it does tend to be survey work. It's small vessels and small operations that may not have even been commercially viable with a full crew. So we continue to keep a very close eye on it. We continue to participate in the work nationally, internationally, and ensuring that the seafarer's point of view is considered at all times.